Point Blank is a crime fiction podcast. It may not be suitable for all listeners. We discuss violence in all its forms. The works we reference may include period slang, which some listeners may find offensive. The hosts also have a tendency to swear.
Episode 59 Miami Blues by Charles Willeford. And welcome back to Point Blank. Hello, everybody. I hope you're enjoying your summer. My name's Kurt, and we're here to talk crime fiction. And joining me, as always, here's Justin.
Hey, Kurt. How are you doing in the heart of summer?
Well, I'm doing all right. I mean, as people may know, there's been quite a heat wave here in the Pacific Northwest. I did miss the worst part of it, but I can tell you these buildings are not built for heat. We're in the top floor of our building, and it's been a little warm.
Yeah, I've been following that fairly closely. I live in Albuquerque, as folks know, and we've experienced nothing compared with the heat that the Pacific Northwest has been experiencing in the past month. Records being shattered all over the place. A number of heat waves hitting the West. I know that there's another one expected this weekend. There was one last weekend. They're going to be breaking records in Montana this weekend. So yeah, pretty wild summer, and it's probably the chaos of weather that we should expect in going into the permanent future.
Hopefully, by the time this episode comes out, the whole West isn't on fire, but seems unlikely this year. I guess we should go talk a little bit about Miami Blues, a place that is warm normally, and one would expect to be warm with that nice little breeze coming off of the Atlantic. So, yeah, today we're going to talk about Miami Blues by Charles Willeford. Are you excited about this one, Justin?
I'm excited about it. It brought me back to living in Miami during my MFA. I lived on Miami Beach, and a lot of the settings in this book reminded me of places I lived, places I visited. He captures sort of a weird middle ground in his stories. In that time before, like, South Beach was a this go-to location for the wealthy, but after the Miami Beach era of the fancy hotels and the glitz and glamour, so he catches Miami at its grittiest, worst moment, and he does that well. And, Miami is a place that is sultry and warm and inviting with sea breezes, but it's also a sweaty, hot, mosquito-filled, wildfire-filled shithole. It does both very well.
Yeah, that's kind of the gist. I mean, I know you lived there for a couple of years, and I spent enough time in Miami to get a feel for it. Over I think 2 winters, I spent total of a couple of weeks on a boat in and out of there, but we'd get off, and yeah, there's definitely, like you said, there's this certainly a gritty side left in Miami, even with all the opulence and wealth and just ridiculousness of it. So it is a great place for crime fiction, I think.
Yeah, like a lot of South American capitals, it's got the incredible wealth of the banking class. It's essentially the banking capital of Latin America, but that leaves a lot of people left out, for folks living in poverty or near poverty, and you get that kind of clash of the haves and have-nots, we see to some extent in this story.
Yeah, that's for sure. Before we get too far along into talking about this book, though, Justin, before I forget, I wanted to give a shout out to some of our listeners, because in our previous episode, we asked for some reviews on iTunes, and our listeners responded. So I just wanted to say thank you, and I'll just say who these were real quick, if that's all right with you.
Absolutely.
MC Chicago gave us a nice review, just a highlight here of a good dive into noir literature. SoCal Chris 9000 says delicious deep dive into the genre. Seacoast Guy says listen to this podcast. Eric says good survey of the genre. So we appreciate those reviews, and if you haven't taken the time to do a review of the show on iTunes, we would really appreciate that. it does help us out quite a bit. So with that, we'll get into Miami Blues.
All right, I'm ready. I have a short review, reflection on my experiences with the novel. You wanted me to start with that, Kurt?
I think that's the best way to go. Let's do that.
Okay, so Miami Blues, if you don't know already, folks, is a crime novel written by Charles Willeford. It was published in 1984 by St. Martin's Press, but the copy I read is the 2004 reprint by Vintage Crime Black Lizard. That's the copy that most of you are going to find out there. This is the first novel to feature the shambling real man's detective, Hoke Moseley. And though Williford had a long career as a pulp writer prior to this novel, this is the series for which he is arguably best known. This novel is special in that it features a villain as a protagonist, which is commonplace today, but was less so in 1984. We've talked about some folks, including sort of like the anti-hero Parker, who played that almost villain-like character. But our guy, as you'll see, our antagonist, Junior, is often sort of set up in the story as a protagonist. We see him first. We spend a lot of time with him, a lot of the stories through his eyes. So, Hoke Moseley is a detective who works for the Miami PD. And in this case, he's investigating a case involving a man who died under mysterious circumstances at the Miami International Airport. Working as a Hare Krishna, the corpse in question tarnished the jacket of the wrong traveler and got his fingers broken. This is the opening scene. This is when we are first introduced to Junior, our antagonist. Hours later, this Hare Krishna is dead. From broken fingers? Is that possible? If not, how did he die? Perhaps there's something foul afoot, and that's what we start with in this novel. Turns out the man with the finger-breaking hands is our bad guy, a humorous oddball of a creep who goes by the name of Frenger Jr. He also has numerous pseudonyms from the men he robbed after getting out of prison in California. He's looking for a fresh start in Miami, a place where he doesn't have a rap sheet. But he very quickly starts to build one, or at least the foundations for one, as he comes into town, breaking fingers, stealing identities, and coincidentally meeting up with a call girl with a heart of gold, who also happens to be the dead Hare Krishna guy's sister. The siblings are both from Lake Okeechobee, a small town outside of Miami, and their relationship is integral to the plot. Junior and this call girl, whose name is Susan Waggoner, hit it off right off the bat, and they concoct this weird 1950s style relationship, which we'll talk about. Meanwhile, Detective Hoke Moseley is hot on their trail. He interviews Susan about the death of her brother. Susan has no idea that the guy she just met, Freddie, or Junior, was the perpetrator of the finger injury. You can tell right away, I'm speaking to my audience here, to the audience of Point Blank, you can tell this is a fucked up story. There's weirdness to it right from the start. And that weirdness doesn't abate. So later on, Junior and Susan are shacking up at Susan's place outside Kendall. This is at the edge of the city, which is vastly growing at the time. But this is right at the point where the city, fades into Everglades. And Hoke comes to visit. He wants to talk to Susan and get a sense of Junior. Freddie or Junior realize that Hoke is a danger at this point. This detective is persistent, and that's a threat to Junior and his intentions in Miami. So he takes action by visiting Hoke Moseley in his shabby Miami Beach motel, which is aptly named El Dorado. Essentially, he beats the shit out of Moseley, and this is a pivotal moment in the plot. This is a shift. Hoke, at that time, he doesn't know who attacked him. He just opens the door and he's instantly assaulted. So it's his mystery to, he needs to solve the question of who his attacker is. We, of course, in classic thriller setup, we know who it is. We have more information than the detective at the time. While Hoke is in recovery, we enter into this weird period of the book where Junior and Susan are playing domestic. They're sort of play acting domestic life in Dania Beach, north of Miami, while Junior entertains big plans and big schemes to make money. How is he going to get by. He's been ripping off people in malls, stealing wallets, getting into fights, stealing shit. He's just been doing this like low-level crime stuff just to get by, but he needs to up the ante in order to create some kind of sustainable income for him and his spouse, so it seems. The two characters, Junior and Susan, fall into this weird patriarch submissive housewife dynamic that is probably deliberately unsettling on the part of Williford, as he imagines this alternative reality where these two outlaws can live like normal folk and play this game of being this classic traditional sort of couple in middle century America. But of course, this is a fantasy. That this can't actually play out the way they want it to, because both of these people are too deep into the shit to get by like this. During this phase of the story, Freddie tries to stop a robbery, which is such a random thing. He's at a 7-Eleven buying something, and a robbery is in progress. He tries to stop it. He ends up getting buried under a pile of rubble and glass when a car backs up into the door of the convenience store. And then it's up to Susan to nurse him back to health. I did like this moment, despite its randomness, because there's some nice symmetry in that the antagonist and the protagonist are both physically injured at the same time. It also leads to a weird lull in the middle of the story, but we'll talk about that. Wrapping up here, at this moment, this leads to Freddie. He has a big plan to commit a heist downtown. He needs the big money. He has a vision for it. Meanwhile, Hoke is recovered from his major injuries. He's determined to nail the bastard who assaulted him and also caused the loss of his precious false teeth that Junior tossed out Hoke's hotel window after the beating. I won't spoil the ending, but this is obviously a story about a cop and a villain, so there's that. You can put the pieces together. I will say this about this. It's a weird fucking book. It's a weird narrative with weird characters in a weird city. We see a lot of Miami in its burgeoning, cosmopolitan, gritty, post-Mariel boat landing, cocaine cowboy sense. It's becoming this big, dangerous, wild city, almost like the Wild West, and this is Williford's getting into the city right at that moment, is capturing it, and really, in a certain sense, creates modern Florida noir out of this story. The city is sultry, it's sticky, it's gross, it's the depressing poverty is clear to see. This is before the glitz and glamour of South Beach. It's before the rise of Sobe at the turn of the millennium. The characters themselves are so strange. Freddie, aka Junior, is strange. The brother and sister duo are bizarre. Almost everybody in this story is just weird. There's also this major coincidence with the Krishna brother and the hooker sister, both being siblings. That's so far-fetched and so absurd that it has to be a deliberate wink by Williford, who's a practiced and long, he's been an author for decades. It has to be a wink to the audience, right? I just assume that's the case. If it isn't, then I have a whole different opinion of this book. But you can tell from the beginning that this book is weird, and Williford's playing with us. He knows what he's doing, and he's messing with us and leading us down some pretty bizarre roads. Did I love this book? I wouldn't call it love. I think that I have a weird relationship with this book, fittingly. There's nothing quite like it. It's singular in its presentation of crime fiction and of Miami. Not only that, but it also launches the subgenre, modern Florida noir, the stuff that has come after John D. McDonald, all the stuff that captures Miami in that Miami Vice sense of Miami, that crime-ridden, wild, dangerous city with palm trees, cocaine, and automatic rifles. And it's an influence. This novel is so influential that we can feel it in almost anything we read about Florida in crime fiction today. For these reasons, I would give this book 4.5 stars. I've read it twice. Would I read it a third time? Yes. But it's definitely an outlier. It's not traditional crime fiction. It's doing its own thing. And I think Williford should be commended for that. So that's my review. Kurt, what are your thoughts on this book? I know that you've read it a couple times, I believe, as well.
Yeah, I have. It's been quite a gap in between readings. So, and it's actually been a little bit since I read it for this episode. So I'm going to have to jumpstart my brain on this book. But I don't find it quite as weird as I feel like probably you did. And I feel like a lot of reviewers out there that always comes up with this book is that it's a weird book. And I don't know if that says more about me than it does about the book, but so I enjoyed it. I kind of fluctuate on this one as to my rating. I mean, sometimes I feel it's a 4 out of 5 book. Other times I feel it's, like you said, a 4.5 out of 5. And I think that depends on how how I'm feeling about how it sets up this other Florida noir, how often it's been mimicked or repeated, and if I take it into context of when it came out, I think I got to lean more towards 4.5. As you said, it's not a book that you necessarily love or even enjoy, because it does have these very unsettled sequences to it. And but it sticks out, as you said. It stands on its own as kind of a unique piece of writing, and I think that's something. I'm not that familiar with Charles Willeford, but it does seem that that's a common thread in most of his writing, and why he has the legacy that he does. That he's kind of his own little unique subgenre of crime fiction.
Yes, that I think that's fair to say, and I'm inspired to read more of Williford's work, but I have not at this point read any of his early work for comparative sake, and I haven't read any of the Hoke Moseley books that come after. I'm eager to see if to better understand Williford's weird combination of ultra-violence and humor and sort of absurdism. I mean, he's a guy who inspired Quentin Tarantino. His wacky sense of humor that he incorporates into it, this novel, if not his others, sort of helps set the template for the modern Florida noir, which does combine weirdo humor with violence and the depravity that's more common in hard-boiled fiction. So, I find it a weird book. I think the timing of its release is important. 1984. I think that there are some things that he does with Miami that are very interesting. Miami at this time was very weird. All the glitz and glamour from the 1950s is gone. It's a city in a state of decline. Miami Beach is filled with old Art Deco places occupied by senior citizens who are living off of pensions, who moved down from New York. There's nothing in Miami at that time prior to the Mario boat lift when Fidel, with a wink, released a bunch of prisoners and put them on boats and sent them to Florida. As a little fuck you to the United States and its embargo. That changed the terrain of Miami. That there was a whole shift in the way Miami was perceived. But prior to that time, it was still sleepy. It was still this weird city that was going through its adolescence. What kind of city was it going to be? A retiree's sub-paradise or something else, something bigger, something more dangerous and nefarious. And I think Williford helped to set that stage with this book, and what I found to be a lot of its absurdist elements. I agree that it's not an easy book. I don't think it's an easy book, and it's not a settled book. It's definitely it leaves the reader, at least in my case, uncomfortable in a lot of parts.
Yeah, and I think we're going to talk about this a little bit more later on, but I think we need to think about the book in context. It came out in 1984, right? It does set this stage, especially of this unsettledness in Florida crime fiction, because 84 is, if I remember correctly, I looked this up a little while ago, but 84 is the year that Miami Vice airs on TV. 84 is also, I believe, the first year that Carl Hyacint's his first novel comes out. So if we look at the direction of an author who's still writing Florida crime fiction, like Hyacinth, these themes that Williford brought to the table have certainly been embraced by authors like him and others, as we'll see. But there was certainly something going on in Florida at that time to have a couple of different things all coming out in 84 that touch on this, I guess, new Florida, as you're describing. the cocaine Florida that we think of now. But yeah, maybe we should poke into this one a little bit more, take a little deeper look at the characters first before we get too much into the legacy of this book. I don't know. Do you have a favorite character, Justin?
Well, they're all strange, but I think that just like the book, we should probably start with Junior, Freddie Frenger.
Yeah.
He's the guy we spend most of our time with. He's the guy that arrives. He's the stranger in a new town. We see him, leaving the airplane, arriving to Miami International, and commencing with an episode of breaking a dude's finger because the person bothered him. In fact, when he gets off the plane and he gets harassed by a Hare Krishna, the reason that he breaks the Hare Krishna's fingers is not because it's not anything vague. It's because the Hare Krishna dared to put a pin into, he sort of like foisted himself upon Junior and put a pin in his new suit.
Yeah.
And the suit wasn't a especially fancy suit. It was just a suit. And Junior was very particular.
I would have to say, I think that this opening sequence is one of the better introductions to a character that we've probably read. I mean, you get a deep look into Junior right away from those opening pages. We know a lot of what this guy's going to be about.
Absolutely. It sets the stage and it's memorable. It's absurd enough and outlandish enough to be like, what the hell is happening? What did we just witness? And of course, this would be amusing and I guess harmless if the Hare Krishna doesn't play any future role in the story, but it turns out that we end up being tied up in this pretty hard to pull apart knot right away between Junior, the Hare Krishna brother, his relationship to his sister, who we meet a few pages later, their weird dad, and this whole triangle of violence and crime and trouble. So Williford sets the stage pretty early for us, even if we're not quite sure what that stage is going to look like. So yeah, I think it's an interesting setup. What were your first thoughts on Junior? What was your impression of Junior as a character overall? Is he a good? Would you consider him a sort of a protagonist in the story almost, or no? Like a protagonist antagonist. He's the villain that we spend a lot of time with. I mean, I know more about him than I know about Hoke Moseley for most of the book.
Yeah, that's certainly true. I mean, he's driving the plot, so yeah, I guess so. I mean, we could certainly look at it from that perspective and make a good argument. The one thing for me with a character like this, especially with the absurdist element to it, is I'm always worried, and I guess I had that feeling at the beginning of this book, is this character going to be so absurd that it's to be unbelievable, basically? Does it?
Yeah.
And I think that that's a problem to a certain degree with a lot of the more, or at least some, of the modern Florida crime fiction that just, takes Williford's absurdism and ratchets it up, by 10 times or whatever. And I, in this case, I think he's fairly believable. I mean, it's a little bit much, but it just scratches that edge. So that works for me.
Yeah.
And, I think it particularly because of the relationship with Susan, like I think you can make that protagonist argument because they're having this weird attempt at a relationship when is sort of this, I hate to call it redemption, but he is trying to make a life outside of prison.
Yeah. Even if it's ultimately a fantasy or too good to be true or whatever you want to call their weird relationship, it's, in traditional crime stories, you have a protagonist who has a relationship or, a sidekick or a partner or some kind of dynamic that helps to show another side of them, not just the side that's engaging in crime or trying to solve crime. So I do feel like there is a protagonist component there, but I also had the same trepidations with the character of Junior that you hinted at, in that this absurdism can sometimes lead to a cartoon character, and that's one of my hesitations. That's one of the reasons I don't carry the flag of Florida noir, like some people are saying it's the, a great genre or subgenre. I think it's a good subgenre when it avoids falling into the trap of the over technicolor, cartoony, absurdist to the point of not being realistic. Bad guys and good guys. Florida, while crazy, is not that crazy. It's just a place, and it's a lot. It's a lot like other places. So I think I agree with you that sometimes that cartoony component is played up to the point of turning readers off. And Williford teeters on that line, but I think he's not doing it just for clicks. He's not doing it to draw in readers. He's also, I think, commenting or satirizing the genre a little bit. And I think, though it's hard to tell, and he's not here to explain that to us.
There's definitely an element of satire in this novel of the genre. And I think I didn't really think about that when I was reading it, but immediately when you said that, I was kind of nodding my head going, yeah, I can definitely see that. It's interesting because he had such a long, actually fairly unsuccessful career prior to this book coming out. That kind of makes a little bit of sense that that might have been what he was doing here. This was a little bit of a jab, and it just happened to work. There's a whole nother reason for that, which we could talk about in a little bit. The unpublished sequel to this book takes a very different turn.
Yes,
but we'll come back to that element. What Williford, I believe, does well is I think he writes a good psychopath, and it's a different type of psychopath than we saw from, say, Jim Thompson, but he definitely gives us a good psychopath. And I know what I read in one of the articles that he credits his extensive time in the military with that, both before, during, and after World War II. And he has some quote about saying that the military was a great place to learn about psychopaths because half of the people he served with could be labeled as psychopaths.
Yeah. I think that Junior does, it's an interesting antagonist in that we see his rationalization for his actions. We're close enough to him that we are with him, sitting on his shoulder as he makes his decisions. I never think of him as likable. He's not a guy I want to pal around with. He's not a guy I'm rooting for. He's violent. He's misogynistic. His rationalizations are so absurd at times, but he believes that he's in the right. And you see the villain fully convinced. He's never in doubt about his actions. He is the good guy in his story, and for that reason, I call him the protagonist. He thinks that he is the hero of his own story, and of course, we all are that. But it's nice to see the way that he thinks, the way that he processes information. When he first meets Hoke Moseley, when he first meets Susan, all of his decisions make a certain kind of absurdist sense when you see them processed through his own weird mind. This mind that, he went to prison in California. I forgot the crimes he committed, but he ended up falling into, or maybe always was attracted to men. There's this homosexuality current that runs through his narrative. There's the people he robs in order to obtain identities in San Francisco. Most of these men were men in San Francisco. He makes absurd choices like, robbing men with Hispanic or Latino surnames, and then identifying as that surname in order to protect himself, with a pseudonym. But obviously, this is like a blonde, like Caucasian guy who looks like he's from Northern Europe, and he's walking around calling himself Carlos Mendez or whatever, and Hoke Moseley's like, this makes no sense, but somehow Junior rationalizes this absurd shit, and you just watch him going, what are you doing, dude? Like, this makes no sense, but he does it, and it's just, that's another part of this tension. You're with this guy. He makes terrible choices. You watch it unfold, and you see his rationalization, and it's fun. And I think that's what Williford's doing really well in this book. Like you said, is you're seeing this happen. You're seeing this villain play out his role, but you're made to. He's trying to get you to agree with him or sympathize with him, but it's almost impossible to do. But you're there. You're along with him, and you're watching him commit these these acts, and you have to either accept it or reject it, but you can't really get away from it.
Yeah. So let's talk about the other person here in this relationship. Let's talk a little bit about Susan. And Susan is the sort of young woman from a small, isolated Florida town who comes to the big city with her brother. And she's going to community college, and she's doing sex work on the side to pay the bills. She comes across as a little, I don't know, ditzy. But again, this is one of those things where by the end of the book, you're like, is Williford kind of playing with me here? Because she makes some choices that don't fit that profile by the end of the book. And is she more complex than she seems?
I had a hard time reading her. Early on, she seems somewhat naive and she's dependent. She had some hard stuff back home. We don't know what that is at first, but she seems dependent on her brother. But her brother's the one playing Hare Krishna, making money on the side. She's doing the gritty work of doing sex work to make an income, and in community college, actually taking creative writing classes to further her life. So I feel like we're seeing her through the prism of Junior, which is never a good prism to see anything through.
Yeah, that's true.
But I would argue that she's more complex and more in control of her life than we are led to believe early on.
I do feel like you're right. We're seeing it through the lens of Junior, but I do get the sense that she sees an opportunity here to, because a lot of her story is about escape, right? And escaping the situation at home. She's not really that affected by the loss of her brother. We find that out really early in the book. So, she's definitely looking for opportunity. And in community college was one opportunity. And I think she sees Junior's crime spree anyway, as a way to maybe, because she's not committing the crimes. So, maybe she can benefit from this and move on. So I don't know. Yeah, I think she is a little bit more complex than she seems at the beginning of the book. And I think Williford does do something of another kind of little screw with your mind situation that by the end, you got to think about her choices a little bit more. And maybe she was trying to do more than she seemed to be doing.
Yeah, I think this is I'm not sure what Williford's thoughts are on women's rights and feminism and egalitarianism, but she seems to be the moral heart and the center of the story. She's the true victim doing what she can to get by in a world that is really difficult for young women surrounded by men who are eager or willing to do her harm. Junior is one such man, though. For most of this book, at least they're working in cahoots. But her brother, is presumably a pal, but also we learn later on, and I won't explain it all here, but we learn that he's not, their relationship is fraught with trouble and bad things going on. And her dad is a monster. She has all these people around her who do not have her best interest at heart. So she carves out her own path, and she uses Junior to the best of her ability to help her along that way. So I feel like she is the character that I most identify with in this story. I mean, Hoke Moseley, we'll talk about, but I don't think that he's much of a great guy either. I don't think he's that. He's no hero. No. I don't see him as a hero, no. And I don't think Williford saw him as a hero based on what he decides to do with his second unpublished book in this series. And we will definitely talk about that when we wrap up our character studies here.
Yeah, let's just move into talking about Hoke Moseley, because he's not your standard detective, even for a darker crime fiction detective. He's a oddball Miami detective who he's divorced. His health is terrible. He's not very well respected. He has bad teeth. He's living in a flea-bitten motel. He doesn't have a whole lot going for him other than apparently he's the detective that you call in to the oddball cases because he does things unconventionally.
Yeah, and the unconventional detective, there's a certain attractiveness to that character. You don't, this is a police procedural in part. That's not a police procedural.
Yes.
This is a novel that's a mix. It's the anti-hero, villain is protagonist, absurd novel with a mix of oddball police procedural thrown in, so we get to see Hoke in action. But yeah, he's an oddball. He's a weirdo. He fits perfectly in this story. He's not attractive. He's not necessarily likable. He has some pretty, regressive attitudes about the world. He's not a guy I want to spend time with. He's depressed and depressing. But here he is. He's the series, he's the guy that headlines the series going forward. So I am curious to see how Williford develops him beyond the unpublished novel that we've mentioned repeatedly.
Yeah, me too. I want to read those other books and see what he does with this character, because I don't feel like, kind of what you're saying is he's not on screen that much in the book, so we don't really get a whole lot other than this sort of depressing sad sack whose one redeeming quality seems to be he won't let something go.
I mean, and that's not always a great trait. I think at the beginning we get Hoke, and I'm not that impressed with him. He doesn't register like Junior or Susan do. He's just doing this very rote, like, I'm going to ask some questions, I'm going to interview these people, and then we really get to know him once he gets his ass kicked and he's in the hospital for a month. And that's at the halfway point of the novel where we're just starting to understand who this guy is. And we don't see him as some hero. We don't see him as somebody who's particularly adept in his skill set. He's just a guy that gets his ass beat and then wants revenge. And it's the second half of the story where he really, as he recovers from his injuries, he gets his new fake teeth. They're not as good as his old ones. He's pissed. I mean, in a lot of ways, his motivation here is largely that he's pissed that his new teeth aren't as good as his old ones, and which is an absurd reason to want to exact vengeance upon the person who assaulted him. And it's just, the whole thing is, I feel like Williford is consciously saying to us, do you really want to read this? Is this the story you want to read? I'm going to give it to you. Do you really like this? Is this a good premise?
Yeah.
Not quite clear what his logic was in creating Hoke Moseley, but at the end of the day, by the last page, did you feel like Hoke Moseley redeemed himself or became the series character that you wanted him to be or expected from a book like this?
Not really. And I guess I find it's a good question, but a
great.
weird answer, because does he really redeem himself or something? Usually that's kind of what you'd be looking for, right? Like this down and out character who goes on a path of redemption, and by the end of the book has like renewed his, drive or whatever to be a detective. I don't really think that's what we get out of this story necessarily. I'm not motivated by that. I'm motivated to see, how does this, sort of guy who comes across to me as sort of a bumbling, depressing detective, how does he keep going? How is he going to continue to succeed? Well, I presume he succeeds in these future novels. And will he, is this ultimately a story of redemption, or is it just a man getting by on the barest of ability? I don't know.
Yeah, it's almost like the tragedy of Junior, but of course my heart is with Susan in this story. What about her? At the end of the day, like, I'm trying not to spoil this novel because I want people who haven't read it to at least get to the last page and feel like there's something they haven't read. But, of the three characters, and we're really not talking about anybody else for a lot of reasons, largely that a lot of other characters don't really matter in this book. Which of these characters do you feel like has the most satisfying, arc? Is it Susan? Is it Junior with his, delusions of grandeur? Is it Hoke, who endures great pain and it gets out of that in order to get his own kind of revenge? Do you feel like any of these arcs felt the most satisfying to you?
Probably Susan's arc in a way, because ultimately she's the one who breaks free of her arc, whereas both Junior and Hoke kind of continue their trajectory to its sort of inevitable conclusion.
I was just going to say, I agree with your thoughts on Susan, and I have my opinion of this book is that I'm not sure how much I want to take it seriously. Because I'm not sure how much Williford took it seriously. My impression of this book is that he wanted to create wacky characters, put them in a weird circumstance, and sort of toy with the reader like a cat does with a mouse. And if that was his goal, I think he did that successfully. I don't think he was speaking about any huge issues here, and I don't think he was trying to create characters that we really want to root for or be connected to. I think he is a master at fuckery.
Yes.
And I think this book gets a 4.5 because he successfully fucked with his readers while putting together a book that did some good things for the genre, especially in Florida.
For our listeners too, even if we have spoiled elements of the plot for you, this is a book that has to be experienced. I think, it's not really about the plot per se. It's about,
No,
definitely not about the plot. It's about the experience of reading it and getting whatever Williford is trying to do to us. And I think you're right. I think he's a master of fuckery. And I think that comes through, I think he's also one of these authors who's like in this realm of like highbrow, lowbrow, and you're not really sure because I forget the name of the story, so I'm sorry about that. But one of his early pieces that he publishes back in the 50s it's basically a piece of, at least in that era, it was considered smut. But within this smut story of a guy trying to like sleep with as many women as he can, there's like apparently commentary on like classical literature and philosophy and stuff like that. So it doesn't really fit the mold, especially in that pulp era of let's just, churn out whatever we can churn out. And I think that continues through his work and let's go to this unpublished sequel, I think, Justin, about this book. And this just gives us an eye into what Williford was all about. So he writes this Miami Blues book, and it has popularity. It's his best-selling book to date. He's actually he's made his breakthrough fairly late in life, very late in life, actually. So the agent says, give me a sequel. And what does he do? He writes a book called Grimhaven, in which we see we see his
sounds like a black metal.
It does, yeah, or some kind of fantasy game or something. But Hoke Moseley, we see him in retirement, and he's gone crazy. He's killed his family and become like a serial killer, or at least a mass murderer. And that's the book that Moseley that Williford gives his agent, and thankfully his agent says, no, we're not publishing this. You need to give me something else.
I mean, talk about master of fuckery. Like who? I mean, if you were a young author and you were just trying to break through, and you put out for one, you probably wouldn't write something like Miami Blues, which is so full of unlikable characters and a plot so absurd and non-committal to being a plot at all that it would be career suicide. At this point, Williford's just all middle fingers, and you think that he's hit his peak of fuckery, and then he writes Grimhaven, which features not only the killing of his family, as you say, but a detailed, like point by point, intimate scene where he murders his daughters in cold blood, not with a gun, but with his hands. Like this is just like, if there's any attempt at drawing sympathy for Hoke Moseley in this first novel, that's way far gone in Grimhaven. He becomes diabolical and repulsive, and this is what he submits to his agent. Talk about balls. Like what a bold move for somebody who he clearly did not give a fuck about the series going forward. At least at this point.
Yeah. And we know this because the manuscript does exist. It is held in a library in Miami, and you can go to the library, you can read it, but you cannot make any photocopies of it or any of that. It'll never be officially released as a book. So people have read it. There is plot summaries. There are bootleg copies of this available. But thankfully, I guess for us and the reader, the agent says no, and then he goes on to write 3 more Hoke Moseley books: New Hope for the Dead, Sideswipe, and The Way We Die Now. So, despite our sort of mixed review of this book, I do want to see where Williford goes with this, because it is just so unique, I guess, as to see, what's going to happen.
Oh yeah. And I mean, for such a mixed review, I did give it 4.5 stars. So 4.5 hits. I do think it has a lot of merit, and I think it's a must read for crime fiction, because we can't just align ourselves with the traditional pieces of crime fiction that help lead the genre toward a certain direction. It's not linear. It's all of the weird eddies and side swipes and turns and tributaries that help make the genre what it is. He helps us to see that the genre can go in a lot of different directions, and it doesn't have to adhere to a formula. He's anti-formula in this book. He pushes the quirk to new levels, and he inspires a lot of writers to loosen their command on expectations. At a time when it's important to do that. I think all genres need to be reminded once in a while that the formula helps, and some readers yearn for that formula. But if you don't break with it, if you don't push it in new directions, it gets old quick, and the genre withers and dies. So he should be commended. And I have purchased one of the books in the series. I look forward to reading the first one after this. And I do want to know a little bit more about Williford. I've read some of his history, and he does have an interesting life, like a lot of these old-time crime fiction writers. He came up from weird circumstances and had a lot of struggle. What have you did some research on Williford, I presume, and have some thoughts on his backstory?
Yeah, a little bit here. And just to follow up on what you said there, I mean, his influence is one of the big reasons to read him. Like you said, Quentin Tarantino, we mentioned Carl Hyacin, James Lee Burke, and Daniel Woodrow, who I've spoken about highly on the show before. So really an influential...
James W. Hall as well.
Oh, yeah, yep. And Elmore Leonard, who's more of a contemporary, really, but he said nobody writes a better crime novel than Williford. Before I move into the bio, though, Justin, I did want to ask you, I haven't seen it. I'm not really that interested, but have you watched the 1990 film adaptation of this book?
I did. Actually, I watched part of it, and the reason I didn't finish it wasn't because I wasn't enjoying it. I just got distracted. I found a free copy online. I have a quick note on it. It stars Alec Baldwin, back when Alec Baldwin was like the hot young thing of the 90s. But let me comment. It actually got positive reviews. It was called Miami Blues. It starred Alec Baldwin. It was directed by George Armitage. And, I got to about the quarter or third way through before I stopped and never got back to it. But Alec Baldwin isn't how I imagined Junior to be. No. Sort of young and tough and so suave. I thought of Junior as thinking he was suave, but not actually being it. Baldwin is great because he goes from charismatic to extremely cold, like on a dime. So you get that on-off switch of the psychopath that I thought Junior was in the novel. But then there was a scene where Junior robbed several dudes with a squirt gun Uzi in the movie, which was not in the book at all. And that's the last thing I saw. I think it'd be worth continuing with the book or with the movie. I think it had the potential to be a good film. I didn't finish it. But it was weird. Like Alec Baldwin was uncomfortable on the screen. He was creepy. So he did channel Junior, I think, fairly effectively.
Well, that's good to hear, I guess.
And what I saw. Yeah.
Okay. So, let's talk a little bit about Williford's life. And I'm going to keep this fairly brief here. But, like a number of authors from this period and a number of the ones that we found to be very successful, is Williford lives especially in his early days, something of a hard-boiled noir life. He's born in Little Rock in 1919. He dies of a heart attack right after he gets successful, really, in 1988 in Miami. But his parents died when he was very young of tuberculosis. I believe his dad died first, his mom shortly thereafter. He goes to live with relations in California, but he has to leave that as well, and he's on the road as a hobo by the age of 13. He travels kind of along the Southwest, probably in your neck of the woods there, Justin. He's hoboing around. That doesn't last too long, about a year. At the age of, it's a little unclear here exactly, but 15 or 16, he joins the California National Guard. Now, this is the late 30s, so this is before World War II. And this starts a period of his life where he would be in and out of the military basically he retires out of the military. He's in there for 20 years. He's originally stationed in the Philippines as a truck driver. He comes back to the U.S. He's working with the cavalry. He gets trained, works with horses. Ultimately, during World War II, he's assigned to a tank battalion and fights in the Battle of the Bulge in Europe. And he would win a number of awards, but most notably both the Silver and Bronze Star. And then he enlists after the war and is stationed in Japan. And during this time, especially the latter part of his military career, he is exercising his writing chops by doing some stuff for radio and supposedly ghostwriting some of his commander's speeches and stuff like that. He works on a few short stories, and he gets a book of poetry published somewhere in there as well. But I also like this cheeky move by Williford. He wants to go to school, right? He never finished high school or obviously went to college. So he enrolls in a graduate program in Lima, Peru for art history. And he attends that until they find out that he has neither an undergraduate degree nor a high school degree. And then he gets kicked out of that program.
It's such a random move by him.
Well, yeah, it's he tried break the system there. He gets his first novel published, High Priest of California. It's not very successful. He has one recurring theme in his writing life will be large gaps between books, 6 years, 9 years, stuff like that. He finally officially retires out of the Air Force in 1956. He's got all these different jobs. He's a boxer, an actor, a horse trainer, a radio announcer. And then he finally settles into getting a degree at the University of Miami. He would do both his undergraduate and master's work there. And then he would teach at Miami-Dade Community College until 1985. He wrote poetry. He wrote extensive reviews, short stories, some pretty good nonfiction from him as well. He's probably best known for the series that we talked about today with Hoke Moseley. Other notable novels include Cockfighter from 1962, The Burnt Orange Heresy from 1971, and the one I see, I don't really know if this is his best or not, but the one I continually see more recently is Shark Infested Custard, which came out posthumously in 1993. That was originally rejected in the 70s as being too depressing. I don't know. I can definitely see how Williford might write something that would be considered too depressing for publishers. So that's a little bit about Williford. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Justin?
Well, I mean, I read a little bit about his bio too. He clearly lived a hardscrabble life. He had to pick up the pieces of his own tough early childhood, losing his family, going on the road as a 12, 13-year-old, being one of those Depression-era kids, having to enlist in the military because the military is available to poor folks who don't have many other options. And he made the most of that. I do like how he incorporates some of his teaching into the story. When Susan Waggoner she takes Freddie Jr. with her to her creative writing class, and they sit and listen to this fairly ineffectual professor drone on about poetry and haiku in a way that doesn't really sell higher education, but I think it's him commenting on his own experiences teaching at Miami-Dade College as a creative writing professor, sort of doing a send-up of like, or finding humor in that profession. One novel or autobiographical story that I'm excited to read, it's called I Was Looking for a Street, and it came out in 1988, and it's one of two autobiographical volumes written by Williford, and one writer calls it possibly one Williford's best book, narrating the period of his life when he was in a depression kid on the road doing hopping on trains and trying to get by, and that I found that information in a piece in the Atlantic called "The Unlikely Father of Miami Crime Fiction." So I think his early life informs a lot of his writing, particularly Miami Blues. I am curious about his work, and I do want to read more of Williford. I know he's legendary because of his longevity and because of the grit he brings with his backstory. But I do want to read his work and see for myself whether or not his early pulp stuff, including the books you mentioned, and also Pickup, stand the test of time today. So, but I enjoyed reading this book. I enjoyed thinking about Miami through the sort of weirdo prism of Williford's lens, and yeah, I had fun. It was a good summer read.
It was a good summer read, and taking us to South Florida and through the lens of Williford was pretty good and enjoyable, if a little bizarre. But that's good a lot of the time. I would say another book to check out about Williford is there is a biography by Don Herron, who we've talked about on the show before, simply called Williford. I have it, skimmed it. I didn't get a chance to finish it for the show, but it looks pretty interesting as well.
Don Hereford is the guy that was the one who was leading the tours, the Dash Hammett tours in San Francisco. I think he has a little cottage industry of leading that Dash Hammett tour.
Same guy, yep.
Well, cool. Well, going forward, coming up future episodes, the next episode is episode 60, which is a round number and therefore significant. We're going to do 5 round reviews. We're going to just do a little bit of catch up on our summer reading, have some good beach reads for you in the dog days of summer. Following that, we're going to come into fall by looking at ecological noir, explore a few books that we think fall under the definition of ecological noir for episode 61. Followed by episode 62, we revisit another dead white male, Ed McBain, and his Cop Hater novel, which is the first novel of his 87th Precinct stories, one of the first police procedurals, and one genre that we have not spent much time exploring because of our dislike for it generally. We'll see if that dislike holds up when we read McBain. I've read the book, and I look forward to that discussion. How do folks contact us, Kurt?
Well, the best way to get in touch with the show is probably send us an email at pointblanknoir@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook. There's 2 Facebook pages. There's one main page for the show, and then there is a group that you can join where folks discuss noir fiction, some movie discussion. It's not a high traffic page, but that is probably the best place to discuss the genre with other fans of the show. So you can check that out. You can always give us a review on iTunes. We appreciate that. And there is a Goodreads group, but I think that is more or less defunct at this point. Well, we are looking forward to seeing you next time to discuss some summer reads. And I know I've got a pile of stuff to get through to get caught up with my reviews, Justin. So I think it's going to be a rapid fire reviews for me next time.
All right. Well, you'll make up for me, who's been slacking a little bit on the crime fiction, but we'll get to our reading, and we'll be back at you in a couple weeks. See you later, folks. Have a good rest of your whatever season it is when you are listening to this.
Point Blank is under a Creative Commons license. Music is by Justin. Copywritten works are property of their respective holders.